The United States and Israel launched joint military strikes on Iran. They called it Operation Epic Fury, mind the initials. In the opening wave, bombs rained on Tehran, on military infrastructure, on residential buildings, and on a girls' elementary school where over 150 children were killed. And across the Western world, people nodded along because they'd been told a story, a very carefully constructed one, and depending on who you are, it was told just for you. If you're a liberal, this war is about liberating Iranian women. The hijab, the morality police, bombing them framed as feminist solidarity. If you're a conservative, it's about Islamist terrorism, Khamenei, the Ayatollahs, the axis of evil. They've been threatening us for decades, so it's time to finish the job. If you're security-minded or just vaguely anxious about geopolitics, it's about the nuclear threat, the whispers of uranium enrichment, ticking clocks, and the idea that if something isn't done now, it will be too late. If you're LGBTQ, Iran executes gay people. Surely a regime that hates queer teenagers deserves to fall. And if you're just a regular person watching the news, you see images of protesters being beaten or killed in the streets. Tens of thousands, they say.
Where are you when about 50,000 Iranians have been mowed and killed brutally by their own regime, and is doing it still right now?
Silos and silos full of dead bodies who they are now burning to eliminate the evidence. People, very important. During the internet blackout, they killed approximately, the estimation is 200,000 Iranians. This is the reports that we're getting.
It feels obvious that someone had to act. One war, 5 audiences, each handed a justification that feels almost too perfectly designed to argue with. Now, ask yourself this. When was the last time the United States government cared this much about your values? Let's take the liberation argument seriously and then demolish it with history. Afghanistan, liberated in 2001. 25 years later, the Taliban was replaced with the Taliban. Afghan women are more oppressed today than before the invasion. Iraq, liberated in 2003. Hundreds of thousands of civilians dead. ISIS, supposedly born from the power vacuum. Women had more rights under Saddam. Libya, liberated in 2011. Open-air slave markets by 2017. 3 liberations, 3 catastrophes. Now, here's the key question they don't want you asking. If this war is about the Iranian people, why is Tehran being bombed the most? Think about who lives in Tehran. The educated class, young professionals, artists, reformists. This is the capital city. The women who already pushed back against mandatory hijab laws in the streets. The very people most likely to oppose the Islamic government. And those are the neighborhoods being leveled. The irony is brutal. You do not liberate people by flattening their city. You turn potential allies into casualties. I could honestly end the video right here because this alone shows that this intervention does not have the Iranian people's best interests in mind. So how did a country where the majority opposed this war end up watching it happen anyway? You have to understand who owns the megaphone. A handful of major corporations dominate US media consumption. The Murdoch family runs Fox. Institutional giants like Vanguard and BlackRock hold major stakes across all of them. These are not neutral actors. They exist inside the same web of defense contracts, energy interests, and geopolitical alliances that benefit from escalation, including long-standing alignment with the Israeli state's interests and a broadly pro-Zionist framing of the region. And ownership isn't static, it's consolidating further. Larry Ellison is financially backing a major bid through his son David Ellison to acquire Warner Brothers Discovery, which includes CNN. And when the coverage doesn't align, the pressure isn't subtle. Here's what Pete Hegseth, the US Secretary of Defense, directly overseeing the war, responded to CNN's reporting.
Or more fake news from CNN. Reports that the Trump administration underestimated the Iran war's impact on the Strait of Hormuz. Patently ridiculous, of course. For decades, Iran has threatened shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. This is always what they do, hold the strait hostage. CNN doesn't think we thought of that. It's a fundamentally unserious report. The sooner David Ellison takes over that network, the better.
Not speculation, not theory. A government official tied to the war itself openly expressing a preference for who should control the major news network at the exact moment that network's reporting diverges. And in the lead up to this war, those outlets didn't question the narrative. They amplified it, streamlined it, and repeated it until it felt like common sense. That's how consent is manufactured, not by forcing agreement, but by making every available version of reality point in the same direction. Now, the death toll. This is where the manufacturing of consent got very specific. During the protests of January 2026, Iranian security forces cracked down brutally. People died, many thousands. That much is undisputed. But the numbers that made it onto Western television, figures of 30,000, 50,000, 80,000 dead were circulating with no verified names attached. The organization pushing the highest figures? Iran International, a London-based Persian language outlet with documented funding from Saudi Arabian sources, a government with its own profound interest in destabilizing Iran. You do not have to believe the Iranian government's figures to see what was happening. Inflated, politically motivated, unverifiable numbers were being used to manufacture urgency for military action. And when you're talking about numbers like 30,000 dead, the burden of proof is not optional, it's everything. If those figures can't be independently verified, can't be tied to confirmed identities at that scale, and surface in the middle of a political conflict, then they shouldn't be treated as established fact. The Iranian government, for its part, has published named victim lists and presented its evidence to visiting diplomats, claiming case-by-case documentation, not just headline numbers. That doesn't automatically make it perfect or beyond criticism, but it does raise a simple question. Why were the least verifiable numbers the ones that spread the fastest, the most widely? This number helped start a war. Now let's talk about who was the loudest voice calling for that war, and let's look at a pattern that the mainstream media never stopped to examine. At pro-regime change rallies across Paris, Berlin, London, Washington, etc., one figure kept appearing as the face of the Iranian resistance, Reza Pahlavi. At many of these pro-monarchist rallies, especially the ones that received the most coverage in Western media, another symbol kept appearing. Israeli flags, often alongside Pahlavi imagery and pre-revolutionary Iranian flags. That doesn't automatically explain the movement, but it does raise a question. If this were a broad, organic opposition movement, wouldn't you expect a wider range of viewpoints, including people who oppose both the Iranian government and foreign military alignment? Especially at a time when Israel's actions in Gaza are widely condemned across much of the world, including by people who are otherwise critical of Iran's government. Instead, the most amplified version of the opposition appears unusually aligned on that front. That alone doesn't prove anything, but it does make the next part harder to ignore. In April 2023, Pahlavi visited Israel, where he met with the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, President Isaac Herzog, and Intelligence Minister Gila Gamliel, who personally accompanied him during the trip. He appeared at events hosted by the Washington Institute for Near East Policy and spoke at the Israeli-American Council Summit, organizations that have consistently taken a hard line on Iran. Gamliel publicly stated, "We in Israel support Reza Pahlavi," and proposed deeper future alignment under a potential new government. None of this is hidden, it's on record. The question is what it adds up to, because at the same time, Narges Mohammadi, sitting in a prison cell inside Iran, won the Nobel Peace Prize. She was jailed on charges like propaganda against the state and collusion against national security after years of campaigning against the death penalty, speaking to international media, and advocating for women's rights. From behind bars, she was still smuggling out messages about freedom, women's rights, and resistance, insisting that Iranians themselves would win that fight. She was against foreign intervention, and she wasn't the one being amplified. And millions of Iranians who opposed foreign intervention supporting the regime didn't become the face of the story either. What you're left with isn't a full picture of Iranian society, it's a selective one. And the voices that rise to the top tend to be the ones that align most closely with external geopolitical interests. Wink wink Israel, wink wink. Iranian authorities have long claimed that foreign intelligence agencies, including Israel's Mossad, play an active role in destabilizing the country, particularly during periods of unrest. State media and security officials have reported arrests of individuals allegedly linked to foreign networks, accusing them of coordinating sabotage, spreading disinformation, and encouraging escalation on the ground. Surprise, surprise, those claims are heavily disputed outside Iran and difficult to independently verify. But here is a verified, documented fact they didn't put on the front page. The IDF has been training Farsi-speaking intelligence operatives for over 25 years. Not translators, not diplomats, intelligence operatives. Soldiers take intensive 25-week immersive courses in Farsi. The language, the slang, the cultural nuances, the social media dialect, specifically designed to produce operatives capable of blending in, monitoring, and operating within Iranian language environments. "We aren't here just to learn a language," said the head of the IDF's Military Intelligence Language School in a Jerusalem Post interview. "The language is a tool to get and understand the intelligence we collect." The program feeds directly into Unit 8200, Israel's equivalent of the NSA, considered by many intelligence experts to be one of the most advanced signals intelligence operations in the world. High schools in Israel run IDF-developed programs teaching teenagers Persian before they are even recruited, creating a pathway into language-based intelligence roles focused on Iran. And it's not just surveillance. In February 2026, days before the strikes, official Farsi language accounts linked to Israeli and US intelligence publicly called on Iranians to make contact. They weren't hiding it, they were advertising it, actively recruiting inside a country they were about to bomb. A foreign intelligence apparatus, decades in the making, fluent in your language, your culture, your slang, your social media, operating at scale. And we're supposed to believe everything that followed was purely organic. That doesn't mean the protests aren't real. It means that in moments of crisis, multiple actors, domestic and foreign, often try to steer the outcome in their favor. Before the first bomb fell, a quieter war had been underway for decades, one that killed people slowly without headlines. Sanctions. According to a Truthout investigation, the stated strategy of US sanctions has always been explicit: to drive down living standards so much so that people cannot bear anymore and rise up to overthrow the government. In other words, deliberately crush the Iranian economy, create mass deportation, create the protests, then use the death toll from the crackdown to justify the bombing. They engineered the conditions for the revolt, then they used the revolt to launch the war. And this is not a new playbook. A declassified 1960 State Department memo on Cuba explicitly stated the goal was to deny money and supplies to Cuba, to decrease monetary and real wages, to bring about hunger, desperation, and overthrow of government. They wrote it down. They have been running the same play for 65 years. Cuba, Venezuela, Iran, 3 different countries, 3 different decades. The exact same machine. In Venezuela, over 4 million people were displaced, driven not only by the government's failures, but by the compounding devastation of US sanctions engineered specifically to collapse the economy. The UN's own special rapporteur recommended that the International Criminal Court investigate US sanctions against Venezuela as a crime against humanity. In Cuba, over 10% of the entire population fled the country in 2022 and 23 alone, surpassing the Mariel boat lift, driven directly by US sanctions-induced economic collapse. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez calls it a new era of depravity. These aren't radical claims. These are on-record statements from UN officials, US congresswomen, and the government's own declassified documents. Sanctions aren't diplomacy, they are slow violence. And they were the first act of this war. When policy is designed to collapse an economy and create pressure through suffering, it's hard to argue it's about helping the people living under it. So here's where we are: a war sold to liberals as feminism, to conservatives as counter-terrorism, to the LGBTQ community as queer liberation, to everyone else as justice for the massacred. Fueled by death toll figures that couldn't be independently verified, pushed hardest by a Saudi-funded outlet and a diaspora monarchist movement, whose leaders spent 40 years cultivating Israeli intelligence contacts, Zionist lobbying groups, and AIPAC-affiliated think tanks. A man whose supporters wave Israeli flags at their rallies while the country they claim to love gets bombed by Israel. Built on an intelligence apparatus confirmed by Israeli newspapers that has been training Farsi-speaking operatives for over 25 years and was openly recruiting Iranians as informants days before the war began. Preceded by sanctions that the US government's own documents confirm were designed to manufacture mass suffering and engineered revolts. The real voices of Iranian dissent, Narges Mohammadi, imprisoned for her courage, was drowned out. The millions who marched inside Iran against the coup never trended, because they weren't useful. Real liberation doesn't come from 30,000 feet. It never has. If you made it this far, I sincerely thank you for watching. And if you want more videos like this, consider subscribing. Before I end this video, here is a clip of an ex-CIA agent talking about the man behind the monarchist movement, Reza Pahlavi.
Reza Pahlavi's going to get what he deserves. He's going to get a fist up his ass.
And then
he's going to say, "Thank you, sir. May I have another?"
He's never going.
Let me tell you about Reza Pahlavi. First of all, Reza Pahlavi is the coward son of the former Shah of Iran. He fucked his brother's wife. His brother then committed suicide. Reza Pahlavi is afraid of his own fucking shadow. And I said in multiple venues that if he were to return to Iran, which is exactly what the Israelis want because he's a Mossad stooge, that he wouldn't survive the walk from the plane to the terminal. I stand by that.
Badgering father.
Yeah, his degenerate father who died like a whimpering coward.
So this
Yeah.
guy's, yeah, and he's like, basically this fucking monarchist idiot. Like, it's 2026. You're a monarchist? What the fuck is wrong with
Seriously.
you?
The only monarchists among Iranians are living in Beverly Hills and being, supported by in the pay of the Israeli Mossad. So, you people are not impressive.
عربستان سعودی حیدر حیدر